Thank you, Craig. Tēnā koutou katoa, and good afternoon to you all. First of all, to Joanne, thank you for inviting me to take part in the Rural Connectivity Symposium for 2020. I'm pleased to see that despite these uncertain times, the symposium is still going ahead and obviously utilising technology to bring us together this afternoon. It's a great illustration of how connectivity brings the world to New Zealand and is increasingly vital for bringing New Zealand's communities together. This event is an opportunity to come together and hear a wide range of thoughts and experiences on the progress of rural connectivity, and to hear stories from panellists with different perspectives about rural connectivity in the future. We know that digital connectivity is important to our rural communities, particularly given their sometimes isolated locations and the learnings from the COVID-19 pandemic. In our speech this afternoon, I'd like to talk about work that is being done to improve rural connectivity across our country, issues in rural areas, and the additional investments that have recently been announced to help relieve some of the pressures on our rural networks. The government's rural connectivity programs, the RBI and the Mobile Black Spot Fund, are both tracking well, bringing improved broadband and mobile coverage to rural areas. Alongside these programs, high-speed broadband is also being deployed to eligible marae through the Marae Digital Connectivity Program, with initial installation and training costs for the first 5 years fully funded by the government. The Marae Digital Connectivity Program was originally targeted to rural marae to accelerate the digital inclusion of our Māori communities in rural areas. And despite the global COVID-19 pandemic and the alert level lockdown periods in New Zealand, I'm pleased to confirm that the overall delivery of these programs hasn't been impacted, so more New Zealanders will continue to receive access to improved broadband services on schedule. The connectivity programs I've just mentioned will go a long way to help close the urban and rural digital divide. However, while these programs are successful providing coverage to rural and remote communities, in order to truly close this gap, we need to invest not just in coverage, but also in capacity. I'm aware that the growing demand for internet services is placing considerable pressure on some parts of the existing rural networks, particularly in areas where government programs such as RBI1 are no longer meeting expectations. This means that some rural populations that were mainly covered by RBI1 may not be able to benefit from a quality broadband connection due to capacity constraints. And I note that for the standard for homes and businesses initially connected to RBI1 was 5 megabits per second, which reflected the state of technology and internet connections back in 2011 when the program was started. In comparison, RBI2 is providing 20 megabits per second. There are also issues in areas that are not considered urban enough to be included in the rollout of ultra-fast broadband, but are considered rural enough to be part of the RBI. We want our regions to be economically prosperous, but if they don't have a contemporary and resilient connectivity, they may miss out on contributing to and benefiting from large sections of the economy. Look, obviously, I'd like to acknowledge that we're now living in pretty unprecedented times. The COVID-19 pandemic particularly highlighted the importance of having durable, resilient telecommunications infrastructure that can withstand unprecedented digital needs of all New Zealanders by changing our lives in various ways. During the lockdown period, New Zealanders had to learn and work from home. Businesses also had to change how they operate their businesses during that period, and these changes increased the demand of telecommunication services right around New Zealand. We're now seeing a new normal in how people use technology in their daily lives, which has accelerated our use of digital technology throughout the economy and of course in our communities. And while some of this increased demand and dependence will be temporary, I don't expect that data demand will revert to about what it was pre-COVID, because social engagement and business patterns have markedly changed. The changes in usage and demand have placed extra pressure on rural networks as more individuals learn, work and stay connected with friends and whānau from home. And as we work to recover our economy from the impacts of COVID-19, it's crucial that our rural communities are equipped with quality connectivity that will enable and encourage economic participation. And I have a keen interest in looking at what role the government can play in rural areas that's necessary to meet the increasing connectivity needs of New Zealanders in those areas. To begin by addressing this capacity issue, the Infrastructure Minister Shane Jones and I recently announced a new investment of up to $15 million to improve rural network capacity. Cell towers that service a large number of rural households that have been affected by infrastructure capacity constraints are being given a priority for this upgrade. And to address further capacity issues in rural and urban fringe areas, including rural marae, the government announced an additional $50 million investment in August as part of the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. These further improvements will help to relieve some of the pressure on our rural networks and ensure that more rural communities can enjoy the improved social and economic benefits that come with a reliable broadband connection. The funding of $50 million will also be used to top up the marae digital connectivity program to enable more whānau and hapu to benefit from improved rural broadband and to continue enabling rural marae in particular to support their local communities as digital hubs. As Minister, it's incredibly pleasing to see more rural communities get an opportunity to get improved, reliable and more consistent broadband services. Alongside these programs and additional investments, the government aims to provide broadband access to more New Zealanders, to upskill more New Zealanders in using digital technology and to provide broadband services at an affordable price. The Digital Inclusion Action Plan that was recently published focuses on the delivery work government does to fund and provide services to people in New Zealand who are not digitally included. And I'm aware of concerns around affordability as a barrier to uptake of broadband services. In response, officials have been asked to explore the needs, gaps and issues and what role government can play in making sure we can make those households more connected. Just finishing up, our telecommunications infrastructure obviously has proved to be durable in the face of, as I mentioned, unprecedented demand. And I'd like, obviously, for this to continue, but we can still do better for New Zealanders. We know that improving digital infrastructure improves people's lives. It ensures that New Zealanders, regardless of where they live and work, can experience all the social and economic benefits that fast, reliable broadband brings. The deployment of the government's connectivity programs will continue during the coming year. However, as the current programs draw to a close, we are working on what is needed to support New Zealanders' increasing demand for connectivity. Can I wish you all the best for the rest of the symposium. Craig, thank you very much. I understand you've also got some questions for me too.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, we'd just like to tease a few things out that you've mentioned this morning. Can I start with, we are in the middle of an election period. What would be your #1 priority in rural connectivity if your government was returned at the election and you had the relevant portfolio?
Oh, look, I think it's the 2 C's, it's capacity and coverage. I think of what the RBI delivered, great for the time, but certainly the demand on some of those towers has increased to the point where we've now got stop sell. And if you look at coverage issues, there are still issues, not just with broadband availability, but also mobile availability too. With the RBI too, it has been a real pleasure to go to some of those sites where we've now got towers servicing to some communities who have really struggled to have connectivity, whether it be online connections or cell phones or mobile phones. It's making a big difference. So, cracking on with more of that kind of work, I think, is really important to those rural communities.
Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. You announced 15 million for capacity in the RBI1 footprint, which I'm calling the stale donut. Is it the government's role to step in and ensure that we continue to upgrade networks like that over time?
Yeah, look, I think it's obviously for the moves that were made 9 years ago, making sure that we do have connectivity in those rural areas is extremely important, not just for community connection, but obviously I think there's social and economic benefit to that as well. So if I think about what is possible in terms of farms and productivity and making sure that they have connectivity within their farms and within their communities, it's really important. I think it's a real economic driver for some of those rural communities. So having that connectivity is really important. I guess one of the things that I've certainly picked up in the last couple of years as well is connectivity in some of these rural areas is really important for attracting staff. I think that they might arrive at new jobs with metropolitan expectations around connectivity to do the basic things that people in cities and towns do, what they do in their spare time, connectivity to their families, etc. So being able to have good connectivity to attract good quality staff is really important, and that's certainly one of the things that surprised me. It was a big factor in a lot of people a lot of farmers or businesses in rural areas being able to attract good staff is making sure that they can connect and do what they needed to in their family time as well.
So just following on from that, the RBI1 and RBI2, I mean, their major objective is to increase coverage. You've already talked about capacity, or you've started to talk about capacity. Do you ever see a need to invest in operational costs and upgrades rather than just expanding that network?
Look, I think so. I think certainly, as I mentioned before, focusing on coverage and capacity is a priority for us at the moment. But I think those ongoing costs are an issue, certainly something that we've heard when we're out and about in rural communities. So yes, but I don't want to take away from our real focus on what the focus of the investment has been at the moment. We've been able to get another $65 million recently, but it is that coverage and connectivity that I do think is what we hear when we go to rural communities. And to be fair, when other colleagues, including the Prime Minister, go to rural communities, it's one of the #1 issues that is spoken to her as well. So that's why I think it's a real bonus to be able to get that $65 million more recently.
Yeah, look, I've got a real specific question, and I hope you have something to add here. Several years ago, we had a change to the pole access regime, which has not really helped with the economics of rural fibre. Is there anything else you think the government could do here?
Look, I think my understanding is that the changes to that regime were intended as an opportunity to improve efficiency of deploying fibre in those rural areas. But despite many rural areas of New Zealand still having difficulty getting fibre to challenging geography, I think we're pleased to say that in these areas where we're seeing innovative and tailored broadband access solutions, and they're often provided by wireless internet providers locally. I think there may be more we can do to encourage more rural fibre provision, and of course I think you're probably going to be talking about these issues during the symposium, so I'd be interested to hear any other suggestions from providers about how we can make this more of an attractive prospect.
Okay, and the affordability question, you did bring that up because it is obviously, well, it's not just important in rural, but rural does seem to be one of those areas that it's quite strong. It's particularly during rural because of the economics of the service. Do you think the government would ever consider intervening on affordability?
I think intervention can take many forms, and I think partnering with a lot of the players in the telecommunications sector is what we're doing. I think whether it be rural or in a city or a town, cost can be a big barrier to uptake. We've certainly seen that in some of the research that was done pre-COVID, and I think post-COVID, the ability for people, whether they be in a rural area or in a city, to be able to do what they need to stay connected, to continue to learn or run their business or be an effective staff member, really hinged on whether or not they had broadband in their houses. So what I've found extremely encouraging in the short amount of time since lockdown is many in the telecommunications sector, many in the education sector, in rural sectors have said that we really do need to do something around affordability and accessibility. And I think we've got some critical mass there now to keep working on solutions to accessibility, whether it be physical or whether it be financial as well. So I think the sector itself, those have been working on these issues, especially in some of the kind of lower socioeconomic areas around education, I think are in a good space, and I certainly want government to be part of that as well. So again, whether it be rural or in the city, we're keen to make sure that as many people stay connected. I think the big lesson that we all learned out of COVID was that those who were connected got through much better, whether it be staying connected to work or, importantly, staying connected to their families.
Cool. And look, just one last question, if I can ask you to cast your mind forward, a good 5 or 10 years, where would you want New Zealand connectivity to be in the use of it at that point? Look,
there's so many uses of the connectivity. If it were to be for personal use, then I think the rollout of 5G, etc., will open up huge opportunity for the likes of things like driverless cars, things we're only dreaming of at the moment. But I think just simple connectivity in some of the more remote areas, I think tourism was obviously in an interesting space at the moment, and being able to bring that back and share experiences and being able to use technology to do that too is important. So I think we'd like to see a lot more, I think, capacity in and around the country of where people want to go and roam. But I think importantly for rural areas, making sure that, again, productivity of farms and productivity of small rural communities is extremely important. And I think relying on some of the speeds that have that they've been relying on for the last 10 years, while it was great, we need to see more of that. And I think that's certainly what we'll be focusing on in a rural sense, to make sure that, you know, in about 5 or 10 years' time, they're at least experiencing what someone who's got fibre on in the city has at the moment, whichever way that might be delivered.
Okay. And I'm going to put you on the spot, not ask you for an answer now, but we're probably going to get some questions during the showing of this at the Rural Symposium. Are you okay if we send them through to your office and get some answers?
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to finish up with?
Oh, look, I know that there'll be some people who worked pretty hard over the lockdown period and since to make sure that people were connected, and I think New Zealand is in a wonderful place in terms of its economy and communities because of the connectivity that we have. Again, I think while some wonderful things came out of COVID, some opportunities came up and some gaps were highlighted as well. And I think that's why I think I'm excited that the telco sector, users, and also the government now know where some of those gaps are. We don't want to ever go back to level 4, but I think we've got a responsibility to make sure that if we do, we're much better prepared to ensure that individuals, families, communities and businesses are much better connected.
Well, Minister, I want to thank you for taking your time out of what is an incredibly busy time, not just as a minister, but as a politician at the moment. So much appreciated, and hopefully we'll see you again shortly.
Thanks, Craig. Hopefully, yeah, exactly. Hopefully we see you on the other side.